Joining us now is John Nichols of The Nation magazine. John, how you doing?
I am great, my friend. How are you?
Doing really, really well. Great to be speaking with you. And I've wanted to talk to you for a while, and particularly ever since Bernie Sanders jumped into the race. We've definitely been really enthusiastic about it, and the coverage and the conversations so far have been about his proposals, but also kind of how the press is responding to him, how we should respond to him. And that's an important part of the conversation. But I wanted to start with, and you have a write-up that you just did for The Nation about Bernie Sanders' proposal that he's putting forward to make basically public higher education free and fund it with a Wall Street tax. Why don't you explain the proposal and what it does and the politics behind it, the strategy behind what Bernie's doing with this?
Sure. And I think it's a good way to ask the question, a way that makes me appreciate Majority Report all the more, because that's not usually the way that people ask it, right? They just want the top-line details.
Right.
And the best way to understand what just happened with Bernie Sanders and this proposal is that for a long time we've had a discussion about the high cost of college, the fact that it excludes millions of Americans who are capable of doing well in college from getting higher education because of the cost. And it simply says, look, if we were to develop a federal plan to provide a tremendous amount of assistance, a tremendous amount of aid, we could create a circumstance where anyone who is qualified to get into a college, a public university, certainly a tech school, as President Obama has proposed, could get in and go for it, study, work, do well, get your grades, and not worry about having to pay for it in some sort of extreme way, either accumulating immense amounts of debt or having to work so hard in a job, or many jobs, that you can't really concentrate on your studies. What we'd simply say in a plan like this is that in America, like many other countries in the world, if you're capable, if you can get into that institution of higher education, we want you to maximize your potential, because we believe that then when you graduate, not taking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, not taking on hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, when you graduate in 4 years or 5 years, you can come out debt-free and join our society and contribute massively, be a really good part of our future. And this is a simple theory that Sanders has taken from the sidelines of our politics and put into the mainstream of our politics. And why that matters today is that he has basically challenged the underlying assumption of austerity, the Paul Ryan austerity, which is that we can't do anything. That America's best days must be behind us because there's nothing we can do. We can't solve any problem. We can't go forward because we're, quote unquote, broke. And what Sanders says is, no, we're not broke. We can do great big things. We can educate our bright young people no matter where they come from, no matter what their economic circumstance, and we can pay for it by taxing Wall Street speculation. Wall Street speculation that has gotten us into so many crises, Wall Street speculation and simple bad and illicit behaviors that sent the global economy into crisis in 2008 and, quote unquote, required a bailout that literally locked up our economy and caused huge crises. We can now tax Wall Street speculation with a Robin Hood tax, small tax on, high-speed trading that will do two things. Number one, pull out a large amount of money that can be devoted to higher ed, to healthcare, to other needs. We can actually get resources that we need. Two, can slow down just a little bit, slow down that high-speed trading so that it is less likely to get overinflated and crash economies. So we have a win-win on both sides. Right. We make those who are taking huge amounts of money out of our economy give a little bit back. That's fair, progressive, smart taxation. And two, we actually rationalize a system of global bond and stock trading and speculation that, frankly, has gotten very, very dangerous for our economic stability. Great idea and a great challenge. 1-2 punch.
Right.
Higher education for all, taxing the people who should pay.
Exactly, and I think that just two things to note with that. I mean, Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs, of all people, actually said a couple years ago, "We know how to generate wealth, we don't know how to distribute it." So even the
Yep.
CEO of Goldman has said that, right? And then, this Robin Hood tax is much further along in terms of European policy making. So there's definitely a precedent for it working well, being in, at least it's very much up for debate in European countries. In some countries, as far as I understand it,
Already have it.
yeah, they already have it, and the European Commission is pushing for it. Now, and the other part of this that I think is really, really interesting and plays out, and I think it has implications for Hillary Clinton, but implications for really how progressive politics is framed on the whole. Because, in some ways, and Bernie can, fall into this just, presentationally, because he's a truth teller, and he's gruff, and he's blunt, and he's direct, and he's talking about important things, and he's talking about hard things. And there's this kind of frame, though, that, the progressives are the sort of like eat your spinach types. They're not the kind of like, fun, flexible, third way Democrat, whatever. They're not the, the sort of pie in the sky, Reagan wannabes, kind of like telling you infomercial stories about the future. We're the people that come along and say, well, actually, there is massive inequality. There's huge crisis in this country. There's all sorts of dysfunction. All that is obviously true. But the other part of it is that, just as you pointed out, Bernie Sanders is actually the one coming along saying, we can't actually fix these things. We have an incredible human capacity to correct these things. So the paradox of this sort of, this myth of the Republican establishment, and even some in the kind of corporate Democratic establishment, of like, we're the optimists, and we believe that, you can get ahead in this type of thing. But, there's no money for anything. And of course we can't hold Wall Street accountable. And of course we can't do anything about anything. And of course people are still going to just need to be driven and grinded by debt, because that's just the way it is, unless we magically need money to invade a place or throw tax cuts or a bailout. It kind of really reframes what optimism is about the future.
Well, I would make a distinction here between optimism and lying.
Right.
And I say that bluntly. Look, there is the circumstance of lying to yourself and others, right?
Right.
And remember, I actually think that some of our prominent figures on the right and the left actually believe what they're saying.
Yes.
So they're lying to themselves as well as others. But they are, and I'll try to put this in the gentlest of ways, completely useless to humanity. Because they are so ignorant, so profoundly ignorant of economics and social structures and the necessities and the possibilities of our time, that they add in political ideas. They put a political framework on that cannot work, that is destined for failure, and that in fact produces failure. And when I say they're useless to humanity, I don't mean to their family. I'm sure they're good to their kids. I'm sure they're good to their neighbors. But from a political standpoint, they're not doing anything to move stuff forward. And I will take a sincere libertarian any day of the week over a lot of these third-way folks, right? Because the sincere libertarian says, well, let's just take it all apart. Let's get rid of government, and, we really believe in humanity, doing all this stuff. I don't happen to agree with that, but at least, they're offering some sort of great big change, some sort of great big alternative that imagines a better future. Bernie Sanders is imagining, and in fact framing out, a better future. Our problem is that we have centrist and center-right politicians in both parties today who are presented as original thinkers, as rational and sane players, whose answer to every problem is we can't do that. Yes. And at the end of the day, that renders our politics, A, fully dysfunctional, and B, pretty boring. Right? It's a drab, lifeless politics that causes the overwhelming majority of people not to vote in the overwhelming majority of elections.
Exactly, and to not get involved in any way, shape, or form. And actually, I want to briefly touch on Hillary Clinton because I think that's exactly right. And what we've noticed from Hillary Clinton, and I think her motives and what she really believes and what she doesn't really believe, for me, I'm far less interested in that than what she actually does. And she does things that are very questionable, and she does some things that are actually very promising. But what I find fascinating is that clearly her understanding of the present political environment is that it requires a more progressive frame for her. And look at what she's doing. So all of a sudden, instead of just a bunch of bland videos and reiteration of sort of of poll tested slogans and mush and everything, what is she talking about? She's talking about criminal justice reform. She's talking about actually the college debt issue as well. She just released a paper on, she's not where Bernie is, but she's getting there. She just released a paper on dealing with the heroin epidemic in the Northeast, and it's like it creates a progressive push, creates a context for creative policy. And I'm just wondering, I would just love for you to elaborate how you think that's going to play out in 2016, and especially also, frankly, if Jim Webb gets in the race as well. I mean, he's not the kind of across-the-board progressive that Bernie is, but he has been talking about, he talked about prison reform in, I think, like 2007, 2006.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another guy who's coming in.
Martin O'Malley has been remarkably courageous on immigration and said some really smart, good things there. Yeah. And Link Chafee is remarkably good on useless wars.
Right.
And so you have a potential of several candidates coming into this race who are inclined to challenge Hillary Clinton, sometimes very directly, sometimes just based on ideas, to be better than the empty centrist, useless politics of our time. And the critical shift there, though, and I cannot emphasize this, is an economic shift. It isn't that all the other issues don't matter. All the other issues matter profoundly, but they are rooted, in my view, in the scarcity of our moment, right? This notion that we can't fix any problem because we don't have enough money in Washington or in our state houses to do it. You've got to break that lie, the austerity lie, so that then you can begin to do the education, the health care, the social policies, the expansive vision of America that really does realize our promise that every citizen, no matter what their background, no matter what their income status, has a chance to be fully a part of this country. And so I think that pushing Clinton, however it's done, beyond an acceptance of the contemporary austerity lie, to actually say, yes, we can do big things and we should do big things, that is a tremendous impact. And I have to say, as regards Clinton, I've interviewed her a number of times, and they've been congenial, actually sometimes very good interviews with a lot of depth. My sense is that Hillary Clinton is a product of her times, and it was a time in which the Democratic Party chose to be managerial rather than visionary. Mm-hmm. There is some evidence, limited at this point, that she is trying to push beyond that managerial mode. The more that pushes her out of that, the more that pushes her toward a visionary response, I actually think the more appealing she might become as a November candidate. Right. I do not think that a center-right austerity agenda, that the only thing that matters is cutting, more of this and reducing more of that and privatizing and, thinking that somehow that which is new is a very old idea of, privatizing public education, privatizing public services, which is a 100-year-old idea, failed 100 years ago, and that's why we had the 20th century.
Right.
Anybody who believes that's the answer, that's fresh, should be, really kind of invited to step to the side of the discourse, and that goes all the way up to presidential candidates. So she's got to push forward. I do believe that this process that's beginning to develop on the Democratic side, mostly driven by Sanders, is an incredibly healthy one, and I would not rule out that it gets far more dynamic. I know that, for instance, Elizabeth Warren says she isn't going to run. I accept that she says she isn't going to run. But I've also covered enough politics to know that, as a political discourse evolves, sometimes people are inspired to step up who said they weren't going to do things. So I actually like a lot about where things are at right now. And I think that, again, I would give Sanders the highest level of credit because he jumped in, and he's jumped in with big ideas. And I think that makes the whole process more dynamic.
Definitely. And I just add, I want to get to TPP because this is where all this stuff intersects really concretely right now. But I would just add really, two quick points that echo yours. And one is I think you're absolutely right about the fundamental issue around austerity. And that actually really shows up in certain issues like prison reform. And obviously there's major racial, socioeconomic issues that define it. And I think it's great if you can work and there can be work done in coalitions with libertarians or people on the right to deal concretely with the problem. Now, that said, it's very, very important that that issue be addressed in terms of the racial, social injustice of it and not the we're spending too much money of it. Because that frame is a very important distinction. Yeah,
you're so smart, and you're so right about this. Because here's the key to it, right? So let's say we get people out of prison. Let's say that we address the insanity and the cruelty of mass incarceration. Let's say that we bring a lot of people out of those prisons, out of those county jails. Let's say that we address a parallel crisis, which is so many people with criminal records for incredibly minor offenses, and that they are profoundly harmed in our society as regards their own personal advancement, getting jobs, getting education. Let's say we address all of that, but we have not addressed the crisis of deindustrialization.
Right.
We have not addressed the crisis of wage stagnation and scorching income inequality. Well, then you've gotten somebody out of jail, which is great, but you've thrown them into a often very dispossessed, often very harsh circumstance where they really don't have the opportunities that an awful lot of other people had in the past.
You're still discarding their life, essentially.
Well, or we're giving them,
yeah.
We're saying, here, climb this mountain,
right?
We're going to take the burden of your criminal record off, or we're going to take the burden of your jail cell off your back, but we're going to put on your back the burden of a jobless economy, of scorching wage stagnation, of a horrible transportation system that doesn't even let people who want to work get to their jobs.
Right.
And then on top of that, a climate crisis that is pretty darn overwhelming and becoming more and more of a problem, especially for the poorest people in the U.S. and around the world.
Right.
That's a hard mountain to climb. So why don't we start to level the playing field? One of the great phrases used by the right and the left. How do you level the playing field? Well, there's two ways to do it. One, a race to the bottom. Let's get everybody down at the bottom.
Right.
Two, let's get serious about high road economics. A high road economics in America puts a lot of money into education, puts a lot of money into training, puts a lot of money into job creation, puts real resources into worker control, let people develop their own businesses, let workers manage their own businesses, and this is a booming part of our economic future. But let's also recognize that a global trade regimen based on a free trade model created by and advanced by Wall Street speculators and insiders looking for the best way to make the most money for themselves is antithetical to a new economy for America that actually works for everybody.
Yeah, so let's get into that. That's very important because I think, that really, at the moment, that's where the rubber meets the road in all these questions. And even I think, I've appreciated President Obama and a lot of the moves he's made, particularly in foreign policy recently with Iran and with Cuba and with some of his climate initiatives and some of his domestic pushes as well. But fundamentally, he's pushing this trade agreement, the TPP, and similar agreements. There's also one with Europe. There's also, and fast track authority, which allows these agreements to go forward unaltered. And, first, and we've talked to David Dane about it, but a lot of other people have pointed it out.
Can I just interrupt you
go
for one
ahead.
second, Michael?
Sure.
Just on the one thing about fast track authority, because I want you to keep on your riff, and I hate to interrupt you.
Okay. Go ahead.
But I interrupt only for the purpose of an instructive footnote.
Yeah.
You're saying allows these deals to go forward. Fast track authority, if enacted now, allows the next president, be it a Democrat or a Republican, to take trade wherever they want to go behind closed doors. Right. And so we're talking about fast track authority not for Barack Obama, but in large part for the next president of the United States, who, if we know anything about elections, could be a Republican.
Right. For Marco Rubio. No, that's
exactly
right.
Sorry to interrupt there.
No. That's a really, really important point. We absolutely. So, and I think that, and it's also helpful, again, to also not even talk about it as a trade agreement, but really a incumbent favoring regulatory framework that benefits special interests. This isn't like, you make video games, we get them, we make this, you get that. This isn't entry-level economics that we all sort of have a sense of and participate in. This is writing the rules of the road for ensuring that regulations don't interfere with already established, incredibly powerful players who have a presiding interest in name the field, whether it's energy, whether it's financial instruments or technology. And, this to me, this is the marker right now. There's been a rhetorical shift where everybody has sort of moved in the direction, even Republicans have tried to talk about inequality. But this is the fundamental issue right now. Hillary hasn't kind of laid down a clear stake, but I think, there's also something about this too, that even if she does, President Obama laid down a pretty clear marker on this when he ran for president in 2007, 2008. So
I was there when he did it.
Right.
I was at the event.
So how...
He sounded great on trade.
Absolutely. So how do we get this? To me, this is one of the core... This, along with, supporting a living wage, which actually there's been some real movement in the right direction on, and a couple of other things. But this seems to be the area where there still is just the fault line. What does that mean? Does that mean creating a serious progressive bloc in the Senate that just blocks this? What does it mean for both the pressure now on Hillary, who obviously is going to try to kind of navigate around this, but really actually moving forward to make it so that we were in a situation where, President Obama, as an example, looks at this in 2014, 2015 and says, you know what? Yeah, I'll back this and I'll put it in some calls, but this just isn't going to happen. This is analogous to actually good things I've proposed that just aren't going to happen right now. What do we have to do to get there?
Well, we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And you laid it out really well. I like your idea of this, maintaining monopolies. We've entered into a new Gilded Age. Our biggest companies today are bigger than they've ever been, and frankly, there's fewer of them. And what I mean by that is that those at the very, very top of monopoly capital in our time are way up at the top, and we're getting more and more of a gap, even within the corporate sphere, between these huge, especially digital monopolies with immense amounts of resources, immense amounts of power, very globalized, and very little job creation, frankly.
Right.
Also, a great desire to get beyond regulation, to get beyond the nation state. If we accept that we're going into a digital future, right, digitally defined with a lot of automation, we ought to be able to say a lot to those companies. We ought to have a lot of small d democratic ability to address what's coming our way, not just in manufacturing, but in all sorts of other areas. Fast track, TPP, takes that away. So the best way to understand what's going on right now is we are defining our ability as citizens to participate in the great debates about our future, about the digital age, about automation, about industrialization or deindustrialization, about virtually everything that matters as regards finance, capital, and the application of finance to our economy. And if we're on the sidelines of that debate will be entirely based on the options put forward by corporate CEOs and speculators. And the debate will not be about how do we make a humane and just and functional society. The debate will not be about how do we make a fair economy. The debate will not be about free markets or competition. The debate will be about how they can make the most money. And to think otherwise is to completely deny reality and the reality of all previous trade agreements. And so the answer on this one right now is no. Simple.
Right.
We can boil it down to one word: no. This can't go forward. It is completely wrong-headed. And it's not that forget about Obama being a good guy, bad guy.
Right.
Forget about Republicans, good guys, bad guys. They're locked in the past. They are using a global trade/globalization model forged in the 1980s when we didn't even have cell phones, right? Not as we use them today.
That's right.
We're in a whole new world, and they're not debating how to do an economy for this new world. So what we ought to do is halt everything. The way to halt everything is this: say no, say no, say no. Literally stand on top of this moment and just say stop. And what that means is that in this moment, it is appropriate to build broad coalitions, to look to people who we don't usually work with, we don't usually agree with, and that's the only way you can do it, by the way, because progressive Democrats don't control the House or the Senate.
Right.
You're going to have some libertarian-leaning Republicans, some sovereignty-oriented Republicans, people who on 99% of other issues you might disagree with. You got to get enough of them across to halt this thing in the House. That's where trade deals are always halted. They have been halted in the past. Fast tracks have been slowed down in the past. They've been rejected. You got to stop this thing, and you should stop it for Barack Obama's sake. You should stop it for the sake of a lot of Democrats. Is that, seriously, I know the president is out there saying he desperately wants this. This is not right. It is not good. What he desperately wants is to extend the past. And by extending the past into the future, he shuts down our ability as citizens to impact that future. It's not that I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's trying to, push people to the sides. That's not the point. It's just he is on an autopilot from 1988.
Right.
And we got to get off that. It is a very simple reality. He says Elizabeth Warren is wrong. He says, all the Democrats who are opposed to this free trade model are wrong. The truth is, Elizabeth Warren and the people who are opposed to this model have deep data and deep experience that tells them this is the wrong way to go. And so the president, in this case, I wish he would stand down. I don't expect that he will. And so for the sake of his own legacy and for the sake of his future and for the sake of our own legacy and for the sake of our future as Americans, we ought to just say no.
Right.
It's very simple, and we ought to build the broadest possible coalitions to stop this thing. And then, once we've done it, then let's pivot immediately into a real debate about 21st century economics and globalization, which respects workers in the U.S. and in the countries we trade with, which respects the environment in the U.S. and countries we trade with, and also that respects democracy in the U.S. and in the rest of the world, and says the genius of democracy, when it's real, is that it allows citizens, not just CEOs, to be a part of discussions about the economic future of a country and, in fact, of the world.
Right. Economics needs to be in play in democracy, and there cannot continue to be this attempt to truncate that and say the most major decisions on our technological work and even in many respects social lives are somehow bracketed from the deliberative process. It's insane. And that old saying, right? I think it came from the UK, and maybe was used by guys that I don't necessarily agree with, but they would. I think there was that. It's about the future, not the past, and it's about the many, not the few. And that's really the distinction and drawing line in progressive politics versus the alternatives. And thankfully, There's obviously a resurgence right now. Bernie Sanders running for president is a big part of that. And you're a big part of that, John Nichols, and
Big
I
win in
really appreciate your
Philadelphia.
time.
Hey, it's been a total pleasure to be on with you, and I love the depth of this show because sometimes we get to actually take those next steps that go beyond partisanship and ideology to the reality of where we're at. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great day.